I'm not sure where to start with Operation Winback after all is said and done. I mean, it was a fun game to write about just because how much my perspective on it shifted yet remained the same. Not enjoying it when I was playing it wrong, and equally so when I was playing it less wrong. I'm not quite sure I can say I was playing optimally, but, well, optimal is often quite dull. I got a question when I did that stream as to whether I thought I was good at games, and my answer was basically no, that my only good quality is being persistent, which, even then, is really only true in single player games. I'm prone to quitting in multiplayer if things aren't going as I'd like. I'm a bit of a prick in that regard, but, I can't pretend I'm good at games as I do so. To expand a bit, my reflexes aren't great, I'm a terrible shot, and on a stranger note, I tend to play in suboptimal ways as a matter of course. I'll take a weapon I find cool over a weapon that's actually better. I like underdogs and underdog options and tend to gravitate towards that. I tend to gravitate towards what I find appealing over what is more likely to work, even if the game itself considers it a secondary option, like melee in shooters or combat in stealth games. I'm something of a mechanical contrarian. In Mount and Blade, for instance, I prefer playing as infantry over cavalry since I find it more interesting. My first instinct in shooters is to see how pistols stack up against assault rifles, for instance. In Uncharted, I try and eschew guns as much as I can and just punch everyone out when I played those games. When it comes to videos, I experiment more and try to find what works and otherwise how viable and enjoyable each option is, and, how much it is that the most viable option is also the most enjoyable, or if it isn't, and so on. I play in what I consider a more standard fashion for the videos overall. When it comes to analysing games, I feel knowing how good you are is more important than being good. I mean, of course I'd say that, I just admitted I'm not very good. So, but knowing how to talk about difficulty and dealing with how iffy things are by knowing not only how it will relate to you, but to a general audience, it's all relative, and it changes based on genre, of course. When I say I'm not good at games in general, but I like to think I'm actually good at 3D platformers and I'm above average at brawlers. I'm okay at driving, but funnily enough, I suck at racing games. But in things like GTA or games where driving is again a secondary matter, I tend to pick things up decently quickly. Meanwhile, sports games, I'm shit. FPSs, I can't aim worth shit. And some FPSs let me get around that by being good with movement, though often again that only gets me so far. In good aim, I feel always trumps movement in an FPS, and it's probably the way it should be. I found Winback to be a hard game, and unfairly so. Unfairness came from strange enemy behavior and weird controls that often stymied how I played. And this is a strange statement, but weird controls I don't think are a flaw by themselves if the challenge is founded on them or around them or accounts for them. And Winback sort of accounts. Jean-Luc is stodgy and turns weird, and his aiming sucks, and his lock-on is, a bit weird. But the enemies are slow and stupid. Until they're bloody well not. Until the levels trick and ambush you. Unfairness is one of those qualities that I'm always a bit uneasy bringing up, and I really try and back up my points when I do bring it up. I have to feel very solid in my conviction that something is unfair and the fuck up isn't just on my end before I'm going to say, no, that was bullshit, no, that was unfair. Because you can always sound a bit egotistical when you put the blame elsewhere when it truly isn't the case, and it's definitely happened. I've definitely called something unfair in at least one of my videos where it was actually, no, you're at fault, you just didn't understand X. And that's probably happened more than once. But I try and avoid it as best I can. And on the other side of the fence, I don't like fairness completely. Being fair is, it's a good quality in some games, but I find it to oftentimes be boring, particularly in single player games. To be unfair gives the player a greater feeling upon success, and enjoyable unfairness is to me a strange holy grail, and I've said strange and weird a lot. Got to try and move away from those words, just try and make things sound more unique. But to go for the nowadays cliche example, people call Dark Souls fair. And, in a sense, but it isn't if you want to get to the meat of the word. fair and unfair. You're outnumbered, you're physically outmatched. You've got a resource cap that enemies won't always share. There are enemies that can fly and or ignore environmental hazards that you need to navigate. But people say it's fair, and not wrongly, because the enemies are predictable and can be learned. You can even odds through knowledge. If you're wary enough, you can halt ambushes even on a first playthrough and avoid traps. It's fair in the sense that it only really fucks you and pulls the rug out from under you when you let your guard down. Your controls, while heavy, are easy to understand and they are consistent. Unlike Winback. Winback pulls the rug out from under you just in the course of play. You walk into a room, you're put in a shitty situation, enemies are there to punish you, and you didn't do anything wrong, you just progressed. And I find that interesting. I find that in its own way fun. I don't think it's entirely a bad thing. You could say it is bad game design, and, that is bad game design if you consider the fact that people want games to be fair. Be fair in the sense that when you walk in, I'm talking about multiplayer in this case, I'm talking about a game where more than one person will sit down. Chess is fair, kind of. It's 51% to white because of first movement. Shogi is fair. Not fair to me because I suck at it, but that's not what fairness means. But you get the point. Winback is a bit cheeky of a game, and I find that gives it character, but I won't always like it. Opinions on games are weird, stodgy, and flexible, and I approach each game differently. And Winback had interesting elements. It was, in many ways, the first of its kind. And this is a very strange way to segue into questions, but a lot of just kind of stuff that would have just been general Afterthought thoughts, well, I get preempted a lot. Not unreasonable. So, let's go to questions. And the first is from DBZ King 119. Question 1. Would the game be better if the Secretary of Defense was the playable character? No, not really. He's playable in multiplayer, where obviously he just controls like normal, not that he would control differently. You see, my reasoning is the Secretary of Defense needs to be a background character because he can't be the lead, because he's a good character because he's ineffectual and stupid. If he was playable, he would have to get shit done, and that would take away from the ineffectual part, which is a part of why I like him so much. Jean-Luc is effective, but stupid. And both of them are dangerous, but for very different reasons. Question 2. If you combine the cheesy acting from the first game with the gameplay from the second game, minus the shot delay from the second game, would that somehow be the perfect blend? Again, not really. The second game did have problems beyond the shot delay. Granted, most of them were adjacent to it, or kind of a root cause or an after effect of it. The shot delay was by far the biggest issue. It's beyond that, the stages were incredibly dull. The structure, while it had interesting reward systems, was at its core highly repetitive. The difficulty was in its own way unfair, with punishing enemy placement, quick pace, and very low health. Characters still moved and turned awkwardly, their controls were sharpened up, but they still had a weirdness to them. It felt like they were sort of orbiting around a central point when you turn them, rather than being directly turned. It felt like your control was always like slightly to the side of them, and that is a very strange way of putting it. You kind of have to play it to yourself to kind of feel like I'm controlling a point that is slightly to the fucking side of the character, and it's very awkward. If these elements were merged, we wouldn't really get the perfect Winback. We'd get a pretty average game with some amusing acting and interesting reward systems. Question 3. What are some good examples of a cover-based shooter done well? Okay, this question is going to be answered in purely personal taste, because I got a similar question later on that I'm going to try and approach more outside of myself. I don't want to say objectively, because who cares about objectivity? It's very boring. I very much dislike Gears of War. But I think that it at least gives the player a lot of options beyond just sticking to walls. You got timed reload mechanics, a good emphasis on melee combat, or at least a good melee combat option, and very highly mobile dodge rolling. Beyond that, I hate Gears of War, I've got to confess. I think a good cover-based shooter has cover as a thing that happens in between moments of action, or supplements moments of action, but isn't the center of it. And that's why Vanquish was by and large the only positive example I could bring to mind and base my positive points around. The best the genre has produced for my tastes, since cover can be used as cover, but it acts as a springboard for other moves, and its use docks you score. And the distance between cover emphasizes use of the fun movement mechanics, which forces a player to kind of use them and maybe realize, hang on, why should I be in cover when I can fucking jet around shooting people in slow motion and be cool? But you can still use the cover. You can play it like a boar, and the game will call you a boar, but it won't stop you. At least not within the gameplay itself. And a score screen at the end of each chapter will do that for you. It will judge you, but it won't stop you. And I think that's fine. I think, you know, I've seen a lot of critics get hung up, particularly around Sonic games, where they hate the ranking system because, oh, now only this style of play is valid. They're rewarding me for score and points. And I can see where they're coming from, but it also doesn't stop you. I mean, maybe Sonic Unleashed for the Wii, I think that one does reward you more medals for good play, so that one does actually stop you. But outside of that example, it's very easy to just ignore a game judging you. I always kind of find it funny when a game judges me, actually. I find it more amusing. I do push myself for ANS ranks, and I enjoy the reward, but when I get a poor rank, it's just like, okay, I'll do better again later if I want to. I'll feel a bit shit about it before that, maybe, but, you know, it's on me. I can move past that shit. And, sorry, I went on a tangent. Back to the question. This is also contentious, actually. And it's another note on game analysis circles, anyway. The Uncharted series is sort of not well liked. We can blame that on a certain person from New Zealand, whose videos are very good, but has created a very annoying brand of, God, fuck the Uncharted series. And I think, you know, it's not entirely unfair. The gameplay is very standard and sort of contradicts itself. It's an action movie style game, but due to how much damage you take, it kind of pushes you away from... Imagine if 70% of Die Hard was John McClane standing behind a fucking wall. You wouldn't find it as interesting. You know, instead of running around getting glass in his feet. And I haven't watched Die Hard in so long. Maybe he does spend 70% of the time just standing behind a wall. Gotta check for myself. And I haven't played the Die Hard game since I was about 8. So I should do that. The GameCube one. Why am I getting so sidetracked today? But anyway, the Uncharted series. I get around the standard gameplay because it's beautifully animated and I find the weapons satisfying. And while I wouldn't cite its gameplay as groundbreaking, at least not in the sense of doing anything truly new, I would say I had a lot of fun playing it. Uncharted 4 in particular, with its highly vertical arenas and bunch of ways to take enemies out. Oh, good. I find it enjoyable. And, you know, it makes you feel like an action star when you get those moments where you dive on a guy and Nathan Drake rears up a punch as he falls 2 stories and fucking sparks a guy out. And I like that. I mean, again, I wouldn't call it well designed since a lot of the risky moves don't really pay off except in terms of personal satisfactions. But you play Uncharted on, say, easy, where you do get to play like an action star. And I would say cover shooter done well, maybe, if you play it in a way that upper difficulty sort of prohibits, then you can kind of have a fun time with it. But yeah, by and large, Vanquish is my, you know, cover shooter done well, because the cover is a side element. It's, you know, it's like cover is what you do in between the fun bits. It's your moment of respite before, okay, break's over, need to get back to doing the cool shit, rather than the cover is from whence you do everything. Gone rampant. Question 1. What would you consider the first cover-based shooter to get the formula right? Okay, now's where I'm trying to get a bit more academic on this shit, I guess. I got a comment from Guru Larry, of all people, which proves the guy exists everywhere at once, saying that surely what the fuck was it called? I'll try and put the comment up, that some old arcade game would be the birth of cover shooting. And before I made the video, as I was writing the video, as I was playing the game, I had put a lot of thought into titling the video The Birth of Cover. Because I knew I wasn't being entirely genuine if you take it as just those words. The birth of cover. Yeah, that's not true. There are games where you can take cover. Any FPS before that, any game with shooting before that, where you put a wall between yourself and the enemy, That's cover. But the actual honest title, The Birth of Recognizable Stick-to-Wall Mechanics, is a lot less enticing. It's not sound clickbaity, a lot less clickbaity, at least to my perspective. Maybe a bit more academic, but yeah. And I responded to his comment that when I was thinking about it, if I had really wanted to, I could have put forward that Space Invaders is the birth of cover-based shooting. It has all the criteria to throw that genre tag at it. You shoot, there's cover. It's destructible cover even. That's a bit ahead of its time, right? And I bring all this up because you say formula. And that's where shit gets murky without any of us meaning it to. I haven't played Kill Switch, but that's what most people say was the first cover-based shooter. Does that just mean it's recognizable, or is it just trivia bandied about to appear knowledgeable? Does Winback somehow not count, or is it just not well known enough? My tastes say that Vanquish perfected the formula, but even I don't think that's truly the case. A cover-based shooter's design is slower than, say, a Doom or even a Call of Duty. Vanquish is a mutation. It's only an improvement, ironically, to people who want cover to be more action-oriented, when cover, at least to my definition of formula, is by its nature a more sedentary mechanic, a more sedentary playstyle. A lot of my argument in the video is that cover is best when taking cover has a downside, something to push you away from it, and therefore Winback got cover perfect by having a time limit, making taking cover good in the short term, but bad in the long term. But not everyone would agree that's part of the formula for a good cover shooter. I imagine many people would say, no, a good cover shooter should reward clever use of cover, not detract you from using not detract from you for using cover. The formula for a good cover shooter is likely just satisfying gunplay and arenas that disguise their simplistic nature and likely do just stop you from shooting gallery every enemy through either aggressive AI or level design that pushes you into uncomfortable situations you have to come out on top of. And, maybe a good plot along with it. I do think that most, cover-based shooters are probably more story-oriented than more action-based shooters, because games have a weird time trying to give a deep story to a guy who can run 80 miles per hour and shoot demons in the face, which, it doesn't really need a good story, it just needs an excuse. An excuse is good enough. A good story is a nice bonus. And, here's a thing, because I'm going to admit some hypocrisy on my part. I never like saying X genre is all the same, even if it's something I dislike. I hate MOBAs, and I will joke with friends who do like them that they are all the same, but I don't mean it. That's just casual banter. I understand nuances in design, even minute ones can equal a ton of different games. Cover shooters go by largely the same build, by the same rules, but there is a world of difference between even kind of games that want to be cinematic or movie-like or action movie-like. Uncharted and The Order 1886 are different games. One is, outside of this circle, quite well liked, whereas who the fuck likes The Order 1886? There's probably someone out there who does, and more power to them, but no, I shouldn't say it. I haven't played it myself, so I shouldn't say yeah, it's shit, because that's just going by what other people have said, and, fuck what other people have said. Fuck what I've said if you're someone else, and if you're listening to this, you are. Anyway, I've taken a long run around to just say I don't really like the term formula, and I'm sorry that may have just made it feel like you trod on a tangent landmine, and this is really just my self-indulgence, not your fault. A really roundabout way of saying the answer is likely to go back to Kill Switch. Taking away from mechanics, even if I think it's technically wrong, people consider it the first cover-based shooter. And yeah, so let's go back on myself and say I'm arguing from popularity. But the fact it's recognized as such probably means in some way it did lay a foundation and had the first workable formula. Even if I myself will disagree with it and say that getting the formula right, to my mind, would be Winback. It's just that most games kind of didn't have the same exact formula. There's, differences and shit. This is kind of what it all comes down to after all the... How many minutes did it take me to just boil it down to? There's differences and shit. I'm really sorry, Con Rampant. Question 2. Most people claim Gears of War and the turn of the 7th generation of consoles popularized the cover-based shooter. Where do you stand on the genre and its impact on the generation in light of how shooter tastes have moved to more fast-paced mobile gunplay? My stance is it's not really my thing most of the time. It had a few years of widespread proliferation thanks to being the basis of popular series like the aforementioned Gears of War, Uncharted, the unaforementioned Brothers in Arms, and so on. And now faster-paced, more frenetic shooters are sort of back. But I wouldn't say they've supplanted them or replaced them. This is going to sound... It's a really weird statement to make, because if you ignore the fact that a lot of people complain about everything nowadays, I think we're in a really good time when it comes to games. If you can kind of ignore the fact that a lot of people complain about stuff, nearly every genre is getting catered for. Every niche, you can find a game for it. I mean, maybe there's a genre or two that has just well and truly died and they're not really getting their due attention, but you can go anywhere and you can probably find a game for it. You know, you don't have to worry that, oh, I won't be catered for. We're just spoiled for choice. You can find a fast-paced shooter, a milsim, a new cover-based shooter. But back in the 7th generation, the middleware market was sort of on the back foot. AAA marketing had become so widespread that, you know, you didn't really have the rip-off games or the middleware market like you had in PS2 days where you could find weird, janky shit. But PC still had its stuff. And the indie market hadn't really found its feet yet. Indie games have existed forever. They've always been there. It's not a recent phenomenon, the indie market. It's just that recently there are ways for an indie producer to get their shit out there and make it big. Whereas in the old days, that would be very much outside of the norm. Has anyone ever heard of Bob's Game? And that guy really, really wanted his games he produced on a Nintendo console or something. And nowadays, you know, he was doing that, I think, back in 2006, 2007. It was bloody over a decade ago, Bob's Game. I don't know if it ever got finished. It was a sort of Earthbound-esque modern-day RPG made by one guy who shut himself in his room for a year in protest. Nowadays, he wouldn't have any problem getting his game on Nintendo, unless he really wanted it to be officially endorsed by Nintendo, unless he was, like, not willing to settle for the indie moniker and just put it up on an eShop. But you get the point. Nowadays, if he just wanted to get a game out, he wouldn't have had a problem with it. But back then, it was, oh, I don't want my games to just be released on the internet. I want it on a console. And to kind of bring it back to cover-based shooters, this is sort of a presumptive way, but I think it was really big for a while because it was new. It had a odd novelty to it, where it was this new way of making a game, and oh, this really, with regenerating health as well, alongside it, regenerating health had recently come into vogue. Cover-based shooter, regenerating health, it's a snail's pace match made in heaven, where, oh, I'm getting shot a bit, I'm getting cover, and now anyone can play for a game, and it's not about resource management medkit, it's a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward. Yeah, we can build a genre around this, it's a simplistic sort of design, and anyone can buy it, and bang, big mainstream appeal. But now, after this 7th generation, it's just another part of the landscape. It's just another tool in the arsenal. And, you know, Operation Winback, cover-based shooter made in 1999, that was very, very long before the widestream... Why am I saying widestream? What the fuck am I doing? That's long before... That's long before regenerating health was really in. And cover-based shooting without regenerating health is a very weird sort of... It's a weird flavor. It's a weird mix. So, to kind of... being reductive about cover-based shooting, the only real impact I feel it made was showing everyone that it existed, and for a few years companies made cover shooters, some tweaked them, and now it's just another known thing, and you're not just going to sell by being the hot new cover-based shooter, you're just going to be, oh, it's a new cover-based shooter, if it's good, people will buy it, if it's not, some weirdos like me will buy it. Maybe. Maybe not. I spent a lot of that generation playing Team Fortress 2, custom CS source maps, Halo 3, and Modern Warfare. As the mainstream games I played, and I played those with friends over XBLA. I couldn't get into Gears. I owned Gears 1, 2, and 3. I bought them because friends were playing them and I wanted to play co-op campaigns. I didn't want to be left out of the loop. But the moment the campaign was done, they all hopped to multiplayer. I tried, but I was just out. I was out so fast. So I didn't fall into cover shooters all that much. I'd take a fast-paced shooter over a cover shooter. If I was just asked in a blanket statement, I would take, not it was really fast-paced, but I'd take Halo 3 over Gears any day. I'd like, yeah, let's hop in a Warthog, gun down some people, and, I can get some sticky kills, and we'd all have fun. So if you ask me in a blanket statement which I preferred, my stance is a pretty milquetoast, it's good for the people who like it sort of answer. I'm glad that the faster paced shooter is back in existence, and people made enough of a fuss that, yeah, we want our Dooms back, we want our fucking frenetic, serious Sam runabout, shoot every motherfucker, and, run and gun sort of games. I'm glad we have them, and I'm glad cover shooters can still exist, and I'm glad that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It comes from the fact that a wider spectrum of tastes get accounted for nowadays, and I consider that a good thing overall. Even those freaks who enjoy grindy loot games. Good for you. I'm kidding. Skeleton. Make a Winback OC. Well, I can't draw, so we're gonna have to do this with words. My Winback OC, or original character, is Eddie Dice's Dent. He's good at guns. His favourite band is The Doors, despite the fact he's deaf. He tracks down enemies purely using his eyes, and he invented the corner shot, making him the best at cover shooting. He infamously missed the Sarkozy terrorist attack on account of not hearing about it, but he did save the Secretary of Defense from an assassin. His nickname, Dices, comes from the fact that outside of work he has a crippling gambling problem. He weighs 110 kilograms and stands at 5 foot 5 inches tall, and it's not all muscle. He considers missing the Sarkozy incident the best thing to happen to his career. What characters from other games would work well within Scat? Or with Scat, rather. I think the lads from Time Crisis 2 would fit like a glove. I mean, as per the title, those guys are time conscious, so they would have given Jean-Luc a much needed kick up the arse. And unlike the Scat team, those guys actually stick together like a team, unlike those fuckers in Scat. See, the problem is, asking what characters would work well with Scat is a troublesome premise, because the people within Scat don't work well with Scat. It's like a whole party of lone wolves who want to be the coolest while having no personality of their own. On that basis, Solid Snake would probably get taken out by someone else within Scat, and they would find Big Boss far too restrictive. Captain Walker from Spec Ops The Line would be fun. He's a man in denial of atrocities he's committing. Meanwhile, the Scat team are just wantonly oblivious and even quickly get over the deaths of their allies. Just imagine a remake of Spec Ops The Line, the exact same story, but it was the Scat team instead. That's... oh my god, that's comedy fucking gold right there. Just Jean-Luc firebombing civilians and then just in his voice going, "Oh no! Those terrorists have done it again!" He would be over it so fast. Just the ending monologue with Conrad just saying, "Look at the atrocities you've committed, I'm already dead." And Jean-Luc wouldn't have even seen Conrad because he never would have had any trauma at all. He just would have never fucking felt it. He would have just turned up. Just at fucking, what was it, the Burj Dubai? Was it the Burj Dubai at the ending? Fuck, I'm spoiling Spec Ops. I don't care. Who cares? It's not actually that good. Just turned up to an empty room. Just like, was I meant to have a moral message here? Can I leave now? Have we solved Dubai? Wait, my orders were to just scout? Golly gee, how embarrassing. Chris from Resident Evil would be fun. I'm thinking Resident Evil 6 Chris, where he's in a bar somewhere in Eastern Europe getting drunk because he's guilt-ridden. That's that fucking mission where seeing all his allies die and only he gives a shit is like, oh no, Mike's dead. Jean-Luc is like, Mike died. And everyone, oh no, well, we've got to move on. No use crying over spilt milk. Anyway, lastly, Sam Gideon. Yeah, I've gone on about Vanquish enough. But this is a man who has dealt with politics and space lasers. In a game about getting out of cover quickly, he really could have just sent the scat team home early. He probably would have saved their fucking lives just by being there. And lastly, a combined question, Roomba-san and Skeleton. The sequel focused on a new cast of characters, which you were fine with. However, would you have liked a direct sequel focusing on the same cast and directly following up on the first game's story? What other game plots would you like to see the scat team tackle? For example, the suicide mission in Mass Effect 2. I would have liked to have seen an older, more cynical Jean-Luc. His military career intact, but on thin ice. Perhaps the two leftover team members realizing just what they had done and keeping the circumstances of the laser's destruction under wraps, leading to distrust on their next mission. Meanwhile, they have a new cast who looks up to these three as the three who took down the Sarkozian insurgents. The three who were there seeing it as a tragic experience, who don't want to talk about what went down. Then, when a new mission comes to pass, they try and guide these new rookies on an even more dangerous mission. Oh god, we could even maybe play not as Jean-Luc, but as a member of the new team, and Jean-Luc is this older character who just seems gruff and hardened by his experiences, but he's still a baby-faced freak. So, let's end on a list of potential missions, and a bit of my rationale on each, just 3 of them. So, first up, a hostage situation in Sarkozia. Amidst peace talks, a bunch of ambassadors are kidnapped by a violent revolutionary group, and Scat is dispatched to rescue them, get them out alive, and quickly, because for every hour, another ambassador is killed. Here's the thing, in each of these ideas, I want to keep the element of time. This advances the Sarkozia situation, but now peace is on the table. And the hostages being executed are naturally your timer and an extension of that. Perhaps you could take different routes and save them in different orders, which affects who might get executed if you fall behind in time. God, imagine if the game was made so that you couldn't possibly save all of them. Like, the game takes a minimum of an hour to beat, and there's, say, 3 hostages, so at least 1 has to die, but you could save 2. You could save 2 if you were doing it well. People would hate that. People would really hate that. And they're like, yeah, there's no sense putting a minimum time cap in a game, because then you just fuck the speedrunners. Alright, second idea. A Winback adaptation of Speed, taking place on a high-tech future train taken over by terrorists. They're going to speed it up and crash it into a production facility. Every hour to pick up speed, they're uncoupling a segment towards the back of the train. It can't be done all at once, so the story works, okay? So you have to get through segments of the game in time. Or maybe not. Maybe just the game kind of jumps you ahead a bit, or a team member gets left behind if you don't beat this segment of the train in time. It'd be a bit weird and contrived, but could be fun. Could be a good way of affecting the plot. And I realise I've just shark jumped on example number 2 of 3. This has nothing to do with Sarkozia unless we make it so, and instead it moves us into sci-fi territory, true sci-fi territory, not just a space laser, a fucking giant future train. I mean, really? I just love action sequences on moving vehicles, particularly atop trains or in trains. I adore them. I adore people getting thrown off trains. I'd say that poor timing, yeah, it shouldn't get game over you completely, but instead lead to party members getting left behind, and maybe on a golden ending, you actually save the train and everyone aboard, but a good ending would still see some segments get lost. This story is a bit more all or nothing, whereas my previous example, had, I don't know, maybe make it all or nothing. Alright, example 3. An ecological attack on an urban centre. This has a more free-roaming bent, like, compared to the other 2, where it's maybe just, the train is entirely linear, the first situation is maybe a bit more, who do I save first? And this one could be interesting, because as time goes on, areas get more and more dangerous to traverse as a deadly toxin kind of floods the area. So the name of the game is to rescue civilians, track down things dispensing the poison to kind of shut it off, buying more time, and track down the ones who orchestrated the attack within the zone. This would be more free roaming and ties timing into traversal, as early on, areas are much more easy to move around. So no matter where you go, it would be an easier version. But as time goes on, everywhere gets more dangerous and restrictive as the kind of poison floods and kind of changes how you have to navigate through areas, and the map kind of naturally changes and gets more claustrophobic and restrictive. I think that could be fun. So anyway, that's all the questions I got sent, I believe. So yeah, that's Winback. Next up is Yakuza 3, which I am recording slowly but surely, as, my word, Yakuza 3 is really where that series gets at least 10 hours longer per game, I think. I think like Yakuza 2 is where, you know, you can reasonably beat the game within 15 to 20 hours. I think Yakuza 3 is where story gets a lot less concise. A lot more, you're going to stand in a room with a guy for 30 minutes and have the plot talked at you. We'll see how it goes. So I hope to see you at least by February with Yakuza 3, because it's big. It's big. Talk to you later, guys.